Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Raj Persaud. I'm a consultant doctor and psychiatrist, and welcome to our radio program and podcast. And I am delighted to be joined today by Janse Van Rensburg, who we've talked to several times before on the program, who I'm a great fan of, and works as a therapist at a famous clinic in South Africa called White River Manor. And she's going to be talking to us a little bit about something that she does a lot of to do with addictions. And I want to open up, Jane, by asking you a question, which is what is unusual about the field of addictions is how many people in it have been addicted themselves to various things. That's very unusual in the world of psychiatry and psychology. You don't get a lot of people who used to suffer from depression ending up treating depression, if you see what I mean. It's not usually a kind of career path. So why is that? Do you think that if you agree, there seems to be an unusually large number of people in the world of addictions who themselves had an addiction problem? And is that a good thing? Do you think it makes you more qualified? Because it seems to look like a qualification of some kind. But what are your thoughts about that?
You know, Raj, I suppose there's two sides to the story. I mean, luckily I have a psychology degree as well, but obviously was also an addict. But I think it does help you understand it a bit more in a sense that, you know, no one dreamt to be one. It was no one's wish to be one. You understand the feelings of worthlessness, low self-esteem, all of that goes along with an addict. But I don't think you necessarily have to be one, but I think it becomes almost like a calling because you so understand and want to help others. You know, I used to think that an addict was some person sitting with no teeth on the side of the street, you know, until I became one myself. And then I realized I've still got teeth and I didn't have to go on the side of the street. I just drank too much in my own house. So I do think it can go two ways. I just think as long as you understand the manipulation that an addict may bring to a session, that would be an important part if you haven't traveled that road, because we can be very manipulative to get our own way or to get medication if we wanted it and all sorts of things. I've seen it happen many times.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's talk a bit about that. So one theory is, unlike the other branches of psychiatry, people suffering from depression or anxiety, addicts are much more manipulative. And therefore, you've got to be kind of alive to that. And the addict themselves, the ex-addict themselves, is much more alive to that than the average person in the street. Let's talk a bit about that, because that seems to be one of the key differences. Let's talk a little bit about what you mean by the word manipulation. How far does it go? Could you give us some examples?
So Raj, say I was an alcoholic. So obviously I don't want to drink anymore. But I'm thinking to myself, I'm not coping so well. You know, I'm just setting an example here. Maybe I should try benzos. I would know exactly what to go and say to a psychiatrist to get a script. You know, or, you know, I'm not sleeping, I'm so anxious, or, you know, to get another drug of choice that would fill the void of the alcohol, you know. So addicts are quite, can I say, clued up with some areas where others wouldn't be. I mean, medication I know well only because I was a medical rep, but I just think that we know a lot more, and the word streetwise can come out. Not every addict is streetwise, so to speak, but we're not stupid. If we want something, we'll find a way to get it with our words, with our mouth, you know, with whatever we need to use. If we want it, we'll get it. Yeah. And that's a sad part. And, you know, people will tell you a sob story and start crying. And I can, and this is not in an ugly way. I can just think, oh my gosh, those are just tears to, you know, you're just trying to make me feel sorry for you. We need to get down to the real deal here, you know. And that's just not known manipulation, subconscious manipulation, but it really is an addict. An addict is just good at that. It's just one of those things. And because I think sometimes in a world you fought in or you wanted to hide it, you manipulated those around you so they didn't know. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the differences then between people who have depression or anxiety is the addict is after something, right? And they've become very skilled at getting that thing. And that's one of the key differences. And one of their ways of getting that thing is manipulating people emotionally. So let's talk a bit about that, different kinds of manipulation. So one manipulation is to make you feel sorry for them. So they tell you a sob story and they're working on you feeling sorry, but you're hardened as an ex-addict to these manipulations, and the needle doesn't move on the dial of you feeling sorry. Is that right? no matter how much they
Well,
play on your
well, I
heartstrings.
do.
Is that right?
I do feel sorry. I'm not saying I don't feel anything for them, and I'll show sympathy, or but generally afterwards I'll say, well, I don't know, that guy I think was just really playing me, or was hoping to get what he wanted, or it's just kind of, they want the answer that they want sometimes too, instead of having to do the work. So if I can blame my mom or my dad and Jane agrees, well, then I don't have to take responsibility either for what's happened. So there's manipulation in all kinds, with getting what I want, hearing what I want. I didn't want to hear I was an alcoholic. I mean, it took me 3 rehabs to realize that. And finally, I mean, my neighbor even said to me, Jane, you don't drink too much, you're just lonely. And I was like, oh, that's so true. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm just lonely. Straight to the bottle store, because I wasn't one, So if that's what we do, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear there's something wrong with me. So if it can keep me numb and happy, I'll take what I need to hear, so I can manipulate you into what I want to hear.
Okay, so could you give us some more examples about manipulation? Do you think the ultra skilled manipulator kind of works out what you, Jane, are most likely to feel vulnerable to? In other words, they go to work on you. They're analyzing you, and they're thinking, how do I manipulate this particular person? And have you any experience of that? And I don't want to give away secrets to the addicts you're going to see in the future, but what do you think is the technique people might use to manipulate you? How might they go about doing that? The ultra skilled manipulator, I think, is in this territory.
I know that the addicts watch me. I know this sounds strange, but I'm quite involved with the program as such here at White River Manor. So I'm around the clients a lot. So I think they watch me and try to play to what they might think my weak point is, because I'm a very kind, friendly, person. But in the office, when I'm counseling, I'm a different person. So I think they do try initially to put on the tears, or blame the husband, or blame their circumstances. And I kind of tell them, we've got to get out. I don't tell them in that way, but I might decide to do a group on victim mentality or something in the upcoming future, just for certain people that have shown a lot of victim mentality. Because that is a hard thing to admit, that you're playing a very sorry for myself person, and it's embarrassing. And we can't blame the world.
So they would target you because they think you feel sorry for people and you're sympathetic. They would try to get you to feel sorry for them. That's the particular analysis they'd make of you.
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you some rather gory questions. Do you think there's a difference between men and women in the attempt to manipulate? If you had a male client, for example, would they try a different approach compared to a female client? And do you think the male-female dynamic is important here? If I had a female addict, I would have to watch for certain things as opposed to a male addict, given I'm a male therapist. What are your thoughts?
Yes. I think that there is. I think the males tend to joke a lot more. Look, there's clients I've counseled in the past that might overstep a boundary, but then you just got to put your boundary back up. But I think it's just, they think, oh, if I joke with Jane, or I say, oh, you look so pretty today, or something like that, I'm going to suddenly fall for their tactics.
Meaning they're flirting with you, are they? Or they're flattering you? They're trying to flirt?
Yeah, they're trying to flatter or flirt, or whatever the case is. And it's, for me, I'm just like, oh, please. In my head, that's what I'm thinking. But I'll say, oh, thanks so much. And then I'll just carry on walking and get on with my day. But I think they need to start seeing that you can say what you want. You're not going to play into my hand. Because I'm here to help, not to enable. So, with the women, they're a lot more open and trusting and honest. I must admit, the men are also, but they do also try a little bit of this here or there, where you've got to say, hey, stop that now. But I wouldn't say it like that, Dr. Raj. I'd be very professional. But the women are more, they're the more tearful, the more, they act more vulnerable. That's more their manipulation style.
Yeah. Okay. Again, I'm going to stay with the gory subject. So as a male therapist, do you think a female client is more likely to try and flirt with me to manipulate me, or that doesn't happen?
I think they would. No, I think they would. I'm thinking back to the days I saw a psychiatrist. I saw a male. So, I mean, you made sure you looked decent before you left the house, because you're going to Dr. So-and-so. And, and I think I want this or that or whatever. I mean, I knew medication. and I used to get it.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm not saying I flirted with him, but I certainly didn't act all innocent, Like, I don't know how to explain it. It was just, I was just overly friendly and nice and chatty.
I like these body movements.
They're gonna be a bit weird, like bobblehead.
Okay. So look, when you were thinking back to your days, would you think, I better avoid a female therapist? I'm more likely to make headway with a male therapist. Would you think that far ahead like that?
Yes.
Would you?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't tell you now if it was a conscious or subconscious decision, but I don't think a female therapist even crossed my mind, to be honest with you.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Because I do think I felt a female therapist would probably see straight through me.
Okay.
Whereas maybe a male wouldn't.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Okay. So now going back to manipulation, do you think the addict is born, a tough question coming up, a more manipulative person, or do you think they learn it through the school of hard knocks about how to extract the drugs or whatever it is they want from the world? So they become manipulative. It brutalizes them, the world of addiction. Or do you think they're kind of born manipulative people? Tough question.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
No, I like this question, so I'm glad you asked it. I learned manipulation not from addiction, but it started at a young age because I knew I could manipulate my father. So I also think it depends on your upbringing. So I knew that if I asked my dad for something, I would most probably get it.
As opposed to your mum?
My mum would say no.
Okay.
So if my mom and my sister also wanted something, they'd say, Jay, you go and ask Dad. He'll say yes to you.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was like just a family joke, and I would say, Dad, and go ahead and ask. But
with the body movements.
Yeah. Hi, Dad, like for me. Okay. And then, so I know I started learning it at a young age. But obviously, when it gets to the point where you need to hide a lot of things and manipulate why you sounded funny on a phone call the night before, why you're not remembering conversation, or why you need to leave work early, or why you're not going to work, why you're sick, we learn to put on the sick voice and, I'm not so well, and I'll go to the doctor, and then the manipulation just gets a little bit more intense. I think it's a lot more, it's not innocent anymore. It's not like, oh, please can I get a chocolate? It's, please can I get some Xanax? It gets a lot more intense. But as you start lying more and start realizing you're getting yourself into the hole, so the manipulation has to increase to get yourself out of it again. Yeah.
So do you think a special kind of person has to end up doing this kind of therapy as a professional because they have to be much more alive to manipulation? And therefore, in a way, they have to be more, I would argue, kind of like, I don't know what the word is, centered, or kind of more in control of themselves, more aware of themselves than the average therapist, kind of aware of their vulnerabilities in terms of being manipulated?
Yes. I mean, Dr. Raj, I think you're in the same field as me. I mean, you've seen it. I suppose it's just how you have to handle it. I do think that being an addict has made me more aware. But I'm not saying that it's like that in all cases. I think there's extremely professional people out there that are not stupid, that can see right through it as well. I've got a saying, and I want to say it, but I hope I'm allowed. Don't bullshit a bullshitter. So don't try and lie to me, because you're lying to someone who knows exactly what that is. So that's just kind of like, please, be honest, be straight. That's what I'm expecting from you, because what you're doing, I've done it before. I'm looking at it, So, but anyone can spot a lie, I suppose. I think me just understanding that, hey, I did exactly the same thing as you, don't try it on me, might make it a bit more easier for me to spot it. I'm not sure. But I mean, we've got here at the clinic, we've got not thousands, all our therapists are actually, we all clued up on manipulation. We have meetings every week where we discuss each client and, what we feel about each one. And obviously I'm the addiction therapist, then we've got the clinical psychologist, then we've got the counseling psychologist. So we've all got viewpoints, and actually they all seem to match up. We're all on the same page when we actually start chatting.
Yeah. Okay. Now, when someone's trying to manipulate you, let's say get the drugs out of you, how, again, there's several different routes of handling that. You can call out the manipulation. You could say directly, I don't think you've really got insomnia that needs sleeping medication. I think you're addicted to something and you're trying to get it out of you. You could just nail it for what it is, right? In my opinion, that tends not to work that well because you just enter into a fight with the client. So what you do is you're involved in a world of manipulation yourself, in my opinion. Let's discuss this. You go,
Yes.
oh, I'm very sorry to hear that you're not sleeping. And then you don't take it any further, right? And they say,
oh, that's
yeah,
terrible.
yeah, that's right. That must be horrendous that you can't sleep. But they're kind of expecting you to then offer medication, but you don't, right?
Yes.
And then they're thinking, what the hell's going on here? He's not doing what I expect him to do, etc.,
Yes.
etc. So do you think there's a sense in which a lot of therapy, because I think this is very controversial territory now to do with ethics and so on, it has to be, if it works well, to be a kind of counter manipulation, if you see what I mean?
I was about to say, I think to understand, as you just the example, oh, I'm not sleeping so well at night. Your answer's almost got to be sort of manipulative back.
Yes.
Like, well,
yes.
that's like you just said. Oh, well, I'm so sorry to hear that. Maybe you should exercise a bit more in the day, keep yourself a bit more busy, drink water, and eat 3 healthy meals, and see how it goes. You know, you kind of kindly manipulate them back and not make them want to fight with you.
Yeah.
You know, because we've got to have a bedside manner. You know, so you're not going to say, "Oh, well, that's a terrible shame." You're going to say exactly what you just said. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I think you should try exercise a bit more, or keep busy in the day, and you'll find yourself sleeping better soon.
Yeah. Well, now we're entering, again, very interesting territory, because I've dealt with many very, very interesting therapists who are master strategists. They would say you don't actually come up with advice because the patient's going to dismiss your advice. If you say things like, go for exercise, they're going to go, I've tried that, it doesn't work. So what you do is you withhold advice. You say instead, God, I'm really sorry to hear that. That sounds like a nightmare. And then you don't say anything else. Right?
So I think I don't want to come see you. Where's your sympathy?
Yeah, but you see, there's a debate to be had in the world of therapy about how one handles manipulation, right? So if you don't do the obvious thing, because what's happening with manipulation is they're streets ahead, chess moves ahead. They're waiting for you to deliver a certain answer. If you never deliver the answer they're looking for, which is advice, you withhold the advice, right? And in fact, some master manipulative therapists would go even further and say things like, God, it's terrible that you're not sleeping. Frankly speaking, I've never known that to be solved by anything. That's a brutal. Yeah.
I'll often say, I don't sleep so well myself. I mean,
there we go. That's a brilliant. Yeah.
But
the manipulation there would be you compete on who's sleeping the worst.
Yes, I'm worse than you. How many hours are you? Oh no, I wake up at 5.
That's right. Yeah, you compete in who's doing worse. So they've got nowhere to go at that point. Anyway, what are your thoughts about this? There's lots of different routes one can go.
I understand the manipulator strategist therapy. I mean, sort of way to go, which is not to give advice. But for me to develop an aftercare plan with the clients that are here, I need them to start developing a proper schedule and routine. So they do need to start going to gym. They do need to, I mean, the meals we serve here are healthy that are on the menu. They do need to eat 3 meals a day. I mean, I can tell you, I can't remember when I last ate when I was drinking because the wine filled me. So suddenly we're saying to them, there's a gym available. Please go to the treadmill. Would you like a personal trainer? Would you like to do Pilates? I mean, I'll organize what they need so that they can start having a better routine and structure. That's why I would offer that advice in this setting, because I can monitor it. They can ask me for a personal trainer. Then I know I'll book them a personal trainer 3 times a week at 5 o'clock. They want Pilates twice a week at 7:30 in the morning, all organized. And then they go to that, they pitch for that, and then they start sleeping better. That's when I would say, have you been to the gym though? Are you eating 3 meals a day? Because we also know if they're not pitching for meals or not. So I think in this setting where I'm not saying we closely spy on them, but we do monitor their, we can also see that they're drinking 10 cups of coffee before bed at night. So you could say, look, I think you need to cut down on the caffeine a bit, and perhaps try a gym session, see how it feels. We can do an assessment for you, and then take it from there. You might just need to be a bit more active in the day.
Yeah.
Because they'll moan about the not sleeping, but they're sleeping during the day, and then coming and telling me they're not sleeping at night. And I'm like, but you're sleeping in the day. I haven't seen you at one session.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can monitor why I would have said the answer I would have said back.
Yeah.
But I think if it was in private practice, I couldn't. Because I wouldn't know what they're doing.
Yes. Well, this is very interesting territory we're in now, because, again, about the notion of giving advice. Now, obviously, many of your clients, by the fact they've come to your clinic, White River Manor, are to some extent must be motivated at some level. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. Even if it's being paid for by someone else and they've been corralled into going there, which I'm sure sometimes happens, the fact they stay must mean there's a certain kind of motivation. And also the fact that therefore they're more likely to not rebel against the advice. But there's an art to giving advice. When you're dealing with resistant people who are manipulative, the minute you start delivering advice, I would argue, sometimes with those people, you're dead in the water, because all that happens is they fight you over the advice, and they explain why that advice doesn't work, etc., etc. So I'm arguing, and there was a famous therapist called Milton Erickson, who was very active in the 60s, who's died now, and he called this strategic therapy. One of the first things he did was he advised therapists not to give advice. He wanted to make sure the patient asked for the advice before delivering it. He tried to create the conditions whereby you detect whether your advice is going to go over, because there's no point delivering it if it's not being asked for. So one of his very famous techniques was he would speak in the session, particularly the very first session where the patient wasn't used to him and didn't know what was coming. He would speak inaudibly. You couldn't hear what he was saying. He would whisper a bit. And there were a group of patients who never asked him to speak up. So those patients weren't interested in advice.
I'm booking that session.
So he would do whole consultations where he would just mumble and not say anything that was audible. And the patient would leave the room, never ever asking him to speak up. So that was his test. But in speaking inaudibly, and again, there's an act of theatre here, and Milton Erickson is a deeply controversial figure, but I think he's throwing out an interesting idea here. He's testing whether you actually ask him to speak up. If you say, listen, I'm sorry, I can't hear what you're saying, then there's a sense in which Milton has created the conditions whereby he's tested, do you actually want advice? Are you willing to fight for it? Are you asking for it? And I think many therapists assume too much the client wants advice, and they just launch into the advice, as opposed to Milton would say, let's create the conditions first whereby we check to what extent do they want advice, because if you don't do that, then you're giving advice and it's not going to go very far. Now, another classic thing he would do, and again, I know this is controversial and many people are going to be quite alarmed to hear this or going to run screaming from the room, he would often give advice that made no sense whatsoever, but he knew it made no sense. It was blindingly obvious. It was nonsensical. What he was checking was whether the patient would say, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. It doesn't make any sense. Because if the patient did that, then it was a sense in which the patient was actually listening carefully to the advice and would, challenge it. But many times, patients would just take the advice, even though it made no sense whatsoever. And that would be telling Milton something about whether they were really interested in advice. So I think there's a kind of pre-advice area that I'm focusing on here, which is particularly relevant to the manipulative client. To what extent are they actually interested in advice? Everyone seems to assume by the time you end up with a therapist that advice is on the table and that's what people are after. But very often that is not what people are after. In fact, there's a whole deep question about why people have come to the consultation at all. What is it was going on in arriving at the consultation? Oftentimes they're going through the motions. They want to look to the outside world that they're receiving treatment as opposed to actually wanting treatment. What are your thoughts about some of those ideas?
That is quite interesting. It is quite interesting to hear. I do feel, Dr. Raj, that we obviously have to listen. I mean, I'm not just going to start talking. I mean, tell me a bit about yourself and what the issues are. And then I wouldn't say so much advice giving, but more coping techniques is what I would focus on. More than advice. Like, when you go home, how is this going to change? I normally ask a question and expect them to give me the answer. And, if they say, I don't know, I can say, you could do this or that. But generally, I ask the question and they need to answer me because I'm not going home. I don't even know what their house looks like. So I'm going to need for them to tell me what their plans are and how we're going to put that in place going forward. So I do expect a lot of work. I expect them to do a bit of work on their own and a bit of thinking of their own, before they come into a session. But, again, Dr. Raj, you can see those that are there. I'm not sure why they're there. I mean, they're there, but homework's not done. They thought about nothing. They haven't been to a group. But, hey, it's a private session. I better go to it. And I suppose that's everywhere you go, I mean, but in my case, they can't manipulate me for anything because I have nothing to give them. I can't script a medication for them. I can't, do anything. So I'm there to listen. I'm there to support, and I'm there to help. And if that's not what they want, well, I obviously can't say, please don't waste my time. But you just know you've got to get through that hour with that client because they're not interested, and I don't know why they're here. And I'm just not going to. I'm just going to sit and listen to them and go, yes, oh, I'm so sorry, and that's it, and keep quiet, and then end the session.
But I think there's a lot more of that going on than people realize. There's a lot more of people having conversation in therapy where nothing meaningful is really occurring. Both sides are just going through the motions, and often they're aware of that. Would you agree with that?
Well, I wonder, Dr. Raj, if you think the patient's aware of it, or do you think they might be fooling us? Because they're there, they're at the session. They've asked a question or two. They've shed a few tears. Do they think that I think, oh, you've got this? I can see there's emotion. And I'm not being ugly. You can kind of see when it's coming from the heart because they really are hurting, or you can kind of see that this person's just here because Dad sent him, or is here because they know they've got a problem, but really aren't that at the stage to fully get the help that they need.
Yeah.
And then we'll see them back again in a few weeks' time or whatever. But I think my question to you would also be then, do you think they think they're manipulating us?
Well, I agree.
At the same time.
Yeah. I think that, again, what's really interesting is how many patients actually turn up and go, how is this meant to work? How am I meant to get better? Actually ask some deep questions about the mechanism of personal change. Again, I think they think because they, in a way, have not been given guidance about how to make therapy work, they think they'd turn up, answer the therapist's questions, divulge a bit, and that's it. They've done the work. They think, therefore, yeah, that's right. I love these body movements, by the way. Anyway.
It's 4:00.
That's right. So anyway, so I think that I think there's a sense in which over and over again people get referred to therapy and they think therapy is what works. What works is what happens in therapy and what you take away from it and what you do outside of therapy. And now related to that, I want to ask another question. I think what's really interesting is when you ask patients, why do you want to get better? Why do you want to give up drinking? And I think it's very interesting that because the whole set of reasons that I think are poor reasons or bad reasons that usually predict people not recovering is when they say things like, I want to feel better. Now, that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but I think it's much better when people say things like, if I don't stop drinking, my wife will leave me. Okay. If I don't stop drinking, I will lose my job. And we would call that instrumental reasons, i.e. reasons that are linked to an event that's going to occur in the world if you don't stop drinking. I've got a court case coming up. I've got to turn up sober. If I don't turn up sober, I'll lose the house. That's a good reason to give up drinking.
Yes.
If you ask them, why do you want to give up drinking? And they simply say, I want to feel better. I don't think that's a very good answer, but it's a very common answer. But what are your thoughts about what's a good answer and what's a bad answer to the question, why do you want to stop or why do you want to change?
I think I often pose the question in a way that, your life beforehand, very simply, I put it as, were you living or were you surviving? And a lot of them will say, Jane, I've just been surviving. I've just been trying to get through the day. I said, well, do you want to live? And then they say, yes, I do. Then I say, well, then the work starts. Now we're going to start working on that. But the same thing, Dr. Raj, is like the instrumental reasons that you mentioned now about, I've got a court case, and I don't mind if that's the reason why they start off wanting to be sober. If you can't do it for yourself and you've got to do it for someone else because your wife might leave you, that's fine. But by the time you leave here, I want you to be doing it for you, not for anybody else. Because your wife's not going to keep you sober. You're going to have a fight with her in a month's time again, or something else is not going to be right, and there's just going to be another justification to drink. So primarily, I want you to realize that there's a life without it, and I need you to discover that.
Yes.
And that should be then for you and for nobody else.
Yeah. But I think this,
that's important.
But I think this is really interesting because I think many of the patients I see when I say, well, why do you want to give up the heroin? They're very taken back because no one's actually ever asked them that question. There's just a natural assumption that they want to give up the heroin. So when I say, well, why do you want to give up the heroin? And then they kind of beat around the bush and I don't get the feeling they're really delivering an answer. That tells me something. I'm really not sure they really do want to give up the heroin. But do you ask questions like that? Do you ask a why question? Why? Because you, in a way, you're coming at it from a slightly different angle, though I think you are agreeing with me that the reasons for giving
I do.
are important.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's always a reason that got them here in the first place, okay? There are a few that have got here because they themselves realized, I've got a problem, I need help. But that problem always does then involve a family, a crisis of some sort, or something on the horizon that will happen if they didn't come here. So it is important to say, you know, I always just say, tell me a day in the life of you. And then it generally comes out what's actually been going on in their life. And then I'll say, so that's why we need to relook at what's been going on. Because you actually, I don't actually know what life you've lived so far. You've just been sleeping, acting normal, or not drinking in front of the wife. But as soon as she goes to shower, you quickly pour a double down it. And then, you know, and your next hope is that she's going to go out just now so you can have another double. I mean, that's just a sneaky, lying way to live. Is that how you want to live? And, you know, so I think I asked them in a different way to you. But it's true. That's straightforward and saying, why do you want to stop? It is actually quite a good opening, you know, because I suppose the heroin addict hasn't been asked that.
Do you think that's too aggressive an opening? It feels like some of my approaches are slightly aggressive compared to yours. You're kind.
No. I think we've got a good team here. There's me, who's a bit of the, you know, the jokester, you know, just relax, take your shoes off, be comfortable, let's have a session. You know, then we've got the one that just says it as it is. And then we've got the other one who's in the middle of the two of us. So we've got a good team. But I think I've been taught to read personalities in one or two of the courses that I have done. So I generally try and suss the person out and how I need to treat them in a session. I suppose you'll also know you can't treat everyone the same. You're going to look at who's walked into your office and then decide, okay, I can't speak like this. I need to speak like that. I can't act like this. I better act like this. So that I can try and touch what they need me to touch so that I can gain their trust. And then hopefully I can get open, honest answers about why are you actually here? What did actually happen? Why are you actually using? How much are you actually using? And let's be honest about it. I don't want to hear you drink 1 bottle a day, but you're actually drinking 10.
Yeah.
You know, it's a whole procedure that goes on just to get them to open up and to be honest in the first place. And I think that for me is sad because I wish we could just get to the point in the first session so that we can just get you going where you need to go.
Yeah. So I think I'm very interested in your opinion on this one. I also think that many addicts, whatever the addiction is, heroin or alcohol, desire something that's being delivered by the alcohol or the heroin. And one of the deep problems is there's really nothing much else they desire, actually. I think to recover, you have to have other things you desire, like a long-term relationship or a job or to watch football. It doesn't really care what it is. You have to have mundane things you want from life that are not going to be delivered by taking heroin. But there's a large group of people, I think, who don't really want anything other than what the lifestyle is that heroin or alcohol delivers. And I think you have to wait for them to decide they want something else before they can stop. But what do you think about that? Maybe you help them desire something else, because I think that's one of the deep problems.
Well, I think for me, that's so important what you just said, because I don't know, I've studied logotherapy, which was Viktor Frankl's viewpoint on you know, man's search for meaning. And his whole primary focus was always on finding purpose in life. And I think that's primarily why at some points people do turn to alcohol, or at some point they've lost a job. There's no reason to wake up anymore in the morning. You know, we need a purpose, and a purpose is always going to involve other people. So I think to help them find a passion again, or a purpose again, or a reason to wake up again with a proper routine and structure is going to make them feel safer, and then hopefully give up. But then I must admit, for me, the hardest calling drug is heroin, firstly, and secondly is alcohol. And the hardest thing about heroin is it's got such a strong pull on you that they're the ones that normally end up overdosing and dying, because if you don't use for a certain period of time and then you suddenly decide I want to use again, it's sometimes a bit too much. And then, that's the end, unfortunately, of that person's life when they were actually maybe doing well up to a certain point. So if you tell me that they only desire heroin or alcohol or cocaine or whatever, then we need really to look at emotions and work on emotions, because there's so much more to desire out there. And you've maybe got to explore a little bit. You might have been in this addiction for too many years. So now we've got to look outside the box.
Well, let's talk a bit about Viktor Frankl and logotherapy, because logotherapy was a form of therapy which was about the search for meaning, as you say. We'll discuss what that means in a second. But Viktor Frankl was a very famous psychiatrist, largely forgotten today, I would say, very active in the 1960s. One of his books, Man's Search for Meaning, I think got the Library of Congress medal in the United States, possibly one of the most read books, actually, in the 1960s. He was a psychiatrist, but also he was interned in a concentration camp during the war. And one of the theories is that he arrived at much of his therapy as a personal survival guide to how to survive really quite extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Interestingly enough, we live in an age where everyone's being toppled off their pedestal. In my opinion, as I understand it, and I could have got this wrong, Viktor Frankl himself has become the victim of a kind of attempt to say that maybe he wasn't quite as good as he makes himself out to be, and that he wasn't at a concentration camp that treated you quite as badly as he made out, which seems like a really weird thing to say. I mean, most concentration camps were probably completely horrendous. So there is a sense in which even people like Viktor Frankl, who are regarded as quite noble figures in the world of therapy, are kind of questions are being posed now about them. But Viktor Frankl also had a tremendous optimism about the human spirit in the face of complete catastrophe. In his view, it seems to me, and I'm interested in your opinion, there was never, ever in life a complete catastrophe. You could always survive anything, which is quite a radical view, isn't it? What are your thoughts about that? It's a very optimistic therapy.
It's optimistic, I think, because I think when I went to rehab, I wrote a thesis there with regards to the logotherapy, and I feel like I'm also in Auschwitz, that I'm also in a concentration camp, which of course I definitely wasn't. But then Viktor Frankl said it as well. Everything's relative to each person. So it might have felt like Auschwitz to me, but it was nowhere near watery pea soup or whatever he got and whatever. But he said that he always explained things on look at the situation, how you handle it. You can't change the situation, but how are you going to change the situation, or how is your attitude going to change towards the situation? And that I like, because I think that's how I view life now. I'm very grateful for being given the chance that I've got and being given the chance to help others, and for going to the rehab that I went to, because it was a little bit more difficult than some others, but I think I needed that. And I seem to have studied him at the right time. When I studied him, I realized that I view life very negatively. And that life is so hard. Oh, that's so hard. But it's actually not. I mean, I can take any situation and make it into something happy or exciting, or just because I get excited, and if I don't look at life like that, and I think that a Porsche is going to need to make me happy, well, then I stand no chance. I'm never going to get a Porsche. So I've got to look at the small things, like I've told you, my Pizza Friday, they excite me and they make me happy. And that's something I look forward to. And Viktor Frankl kind of did that as well. I mean, he lived through the whole of Auschwitz, hoping to see his new wife again. And she had already been gassed, I think, 2 weeks after he arrived. So there was a positive outlook. And I think that it's needed, especially in the world today, because it's negative and we wear the mask and we act happy, but I really want to be happy. I don't want to have this to be a mask.
But let's talk a bit about going back to the first question I asked you, which is why is it so many therapists in the world of addictions are ex-addicts? I have a theory that one of the reasons people have decided I'm going to stay off the heroin and the alcohol is pursuing this meaning in life of helping other addicts. In a way, it's a kind of self-therapy. It's a lot of addicts think that the way I'll manage to stay on the straight and narrow and not go back is by giving back to this world and helping other addicts. So there's a kind of personal salvation thing that's also going on, I think. What do you think?
I do definitely agree that helping is healing. I do definitely agree that often I'm counseling someone and saying, Jane, I hope you're listening to what you're saying. It's really good of you to give that advice. Are you doing it? So there are, I mean, I can give advice. I know that I know what they need, but I also know what I need. So I often have to do a bit of a self-analysis afterwards. But I also think I do feel, and listen, Dr. Raj, you can tell me your thoughts on this. There are some people, and I found it mainly to be the heroin addicts that have to be in a rehab in order to stay clean. I've just met quite a few that as soon as they've left the comfort of the bubble, so to speak, they don't cope. So they normally end up living on the property, helping out in some way, either in operations or in maintenance, or maybe studying to be a therapist. But I think that all depends on the coping skills you developed before becoming an addict, because I think that's also quite vital. I mean, if I became an addict at 16, I think I would find it very difficult to cope in today's world, because I would have had to learn many skills that I lacked out from the age of 16. Plus, my mentality would probably still be 16. So I'm quite lucky that I became one at 32. So I had lived, I had coped, I had done a few things. So yes, I do think that there's some people that need the rehab to be sober, but I don't feel it's always the case. I do think many of us can survive without working in one, but it's just a passion. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a very interesting idea, which is that actually one of the reasons they become therapists is it allows them to stay in a safe environment, like be in a rehab center. So it's their way of staying in rehab in a prolonged way,
Yes.
actually.
Yes. And there's many people that think they're going to make it, and I've just watched them fall time and time again every time they've left some sort of facility. And I just think there's a handful or more that need to be in a facility. And if it means you have to live there and you
get a job there.
Back, yes, and you get a job there.
Yeah.
And that helps you stay clean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I do think that I can own I mean, I've been clean, 12 years, say now. I'm sure my work must have played a big part in it. I can't arrive here drunk or stinking of alcohol or, I can't be an example to anyone if that's what I'm deciding to do. So I do agree that my job has definitely kept me sober.
Yeah.
Maybe when I've faced some tough times, so it hasn't really crossed my mind. Plus, I'm lucky, Dr. Raj, I'm surrounded by therapists who I can talk to.
Yeah.
If I'm not I'm not feeling in a safe, if I'm not in a safe place, let me just go chat to someone.
Yeah.
So it's quite a helpful field to be in.
So it's quite an interesting idea you just said, which is that one of the reasons why ex-addicts may choose to work in the area is they know that the very earliest signs of relapse for them are more likely to be discovered, precisely because they're actually working in a rehab unit.
Yes.
That's really interesting.
I've seen it time and time and time again. I've also seen it where usage happens in a rehab, different rehabs that I've worked at. And that's just because they're working there, but they're thinking they've got a bit more freedom. Maybe their first paycheck, they still don't know how to cope with getting money and not using it straight on drugs. And unfortunately, that's what they go and do immediately. So it's back on the program and having to work on, you can't just spend money when you get it because that's what you did before, So, I mean, there's so many aspects to it. It's such a broad field with regards to what do you need to get by? What do you need to cope with when you go home? What needs to change? What haven't you looked at? There's so many questions to ask, but I do think that some people, and I call it the bubble, need the bubble forever.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a safe space.
Yeah. Now I want to come back to this point. I want to touch on a related point, which is one of the other things that I think happens sometimes in the world of addictions is that you can often see a client and it can see in a way a chain of events that's liable to land them in trouble in the long run, and they're going to end up needing to drink. So let us say we start quite far away, which is there are people who are a bit intolerant of other people. They're a bit irritable. And as a result, whenever they have conflict with other people, they have a fight, okay? Or they swear at them. And we know, both of us, that if you have that philosophy of life, which is you're always going to fight with everyone, even though you believe you're in the right, you end up
Yes.
isolated, you end up upset, and it doesn't work, and you end up having to turn to drink. But there's a chain of events which ends up with the drinking, and it starts somewhere quite far away. And in fact, there is even a term for this called seemingly unrelated behavior or seemingly irrelevant behavior, right? So it seems seemingly irrelevant, you're an irritable character, but in a various chain of events, it actually leads in the end to the drinking because your life just doesn't work. Now, getting those people to address that issue, because it seems so far away from the actual drinking, seems very, very tricky in my experience. What are your thoughts, if you agree? You're trying to get someone to change their personality so they're less irritable, and that will help them in the long run stop drinking. They often can't see the link between one and the other. What are your thoughts about that?
Those are difficult ones, because I do find that I would call it a deflection mechanism. They'll find fault in things and cause a fight rather than look at themselves.
Yes.
So for me, I would try to sit them down and say, what's actually going on? What's really happening inside? Because that, in my head, I'm thinking, I'm so glad I'm not you, because I would not want to be so bitter and angry all the time. But you're deflecting. You're deflecting that because there's actually something else going on, and that's you. So what is it in you that you're too afraid of at the moment? Or what don't you want to look at? Because unfortunately, as you said, the more you start fighting with people, the more isolation is going to happen, the more lonely you're going to be. And what a wonderful excuse to drink or use again.
Absolutely.
I have no friends. Yes. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah.
Well, another one
any reason.
But another one that I see a lot of is people who get very, very angry. Something makes them angry. They believe they're right to be angry. They usually find something that has gone wrong, where someone has wronged them at some level. But even if you've been wronged, getting that angry or that livid is bound to end in trouble sooner or later, because your only way of coping with extreme fury with the world is eventually to turn to some kind of substance. And you just know it's coming. It may not come today. It may take 6 months. But if you're going to be this angry all the time, and when you try to say to them, well, look, you could be charming in the face of difficulty, as another approach to difficult people, they jump down your throat as they often say, well, that's just not me. And you're trying to explain to them, it may not be you, but if you carry on doing this anger thing, that's not going to end in a very good place in terms of the heroin or the drink. Again, do you have that experience? Do you agree with that thing being quite important?
I'm not going to say it, but there was an incident lately, and I didn't know what to do. I was like, what the hell was that? And I think I kind of just stood there in shock and laughed, because I thought, you've got to be kidding me. Is that the behavior of a 50-year-old man/woman or whatever? I don't want to say. So for me, sometimes my mouth is probably wide open, because, my face tells the story, unfortunately. So I have to really watch how I'm looking at you. And what I honestly feel, though, that anger is, obviously we're born with anger. It's a primary emotion, okay? But it ends up, because we didn't really evolve with anger. The world didn't evolve with anger when we evolved, okay? So I'm not giving you a lecture, but I'm trying to say that anger is often a secondary emotion these days. So generally, if you're angry, there's an emotion that happened just before the anger. Was it rejection? Was it frustration? I mean, and that's the emotion I want to focus on. So I'll often sit them down and say, okay, that happened, but what happened just before that happened? What were you feeling? And they were like, well, I didn't get the attention when I asked for it. And so I said, did you feel rejected? Yes. Okay. Then that's a trigger for you. So I always have to try and look at what happened just before the anger, because the anger is just the side effect of what I'm really feeling, and I'm trying to protect myself. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from. But yeah, no, I've got millions of stories. We could do a whole session on that one day.
Okay. Well, in the time we've got left, one other thing I want to focus on, which I'm very interested in, is the trail of self-destruction of addicts, because I think they're by far and away, at some level, some of the most self-destructive people in terms of what they lose. So could you tell us a bit about that? From your experience, what have people lost and just kept going with the addiction nonetheless? They often lost their jobs, they've lost their income, they've lost their homes, they've lost their partners, they've lost their friends, yet they keep going with this self-destructive thing. Could you tell us a bit about any stories that you can tell us where you disguise the details to protect confidentiality, or your reaction to that point?
That's why I actually had this conversation with someone, and I've actually had it with my husband as well. the people have self-destructed to such a point that they've been in sort of the worst prisons in South Africa, which, believe you me, I wouldn't make one day in any prison. I wouldn't make half an hour. I'd be dead. So, but that wasn't a rock bottom. So there's still, when you're saying the self-destructive behavior, it's extremely selfish. Addiction is selfish. I also say on the same level, though, that recovery needs to be selfish too, because it also needs to be self-focused. But is there a rock bottom of the self-destructive behavior? Or do some people just keep going till there is no more you? Because there was a rock bottom for me. I honestly thought that when I was going to lose my family, that I had to stop, because and so I did start rehab for them firstly, but it ended up being for me. But I've seen people who don't have a rock bottom. You've been to prison, you've been jailed, you've lost everything, you've got no family, you've got no house. What do you do? I keep to think to myself, what else could happen to you that could possibly make you say, okay, today is the day I want help? And for me, that's always going to be a controversial argument between certain therapists, because some say there is and some say there isn't. I believe there's one because I had one, but I've seen people with none. So what is there with the self-destructive behavior? When does it end?
Yeah, so that's a very important point of debate. Some therapists, and I think say that you need to hit rock bottom before you can get better. And you're saying for some people, there is no rock bottom.
Yeah, well, it doesn't seem so. I mean, they've lost everything. They've been to a situation I couldn't dream of going through because I would die. But it's just a carry on. It's just a carry on. So isn't there, that's always going to be a debate amongst therapists, I think worldwide, because I've heard a lot of people say, yeah, they're ready now. They've hit their rock bottom, and I'll just look at them and say, yeah, they said that last time. So I want action. Stop telling me, because I've been an addict. Actions speak louder than words, because I can talk a story, but I'd rather show you through my behavior that I mean it. I want to be honest. I want to be loyal. I want to work hard, and that I'll show you. I'm not going to just tell you. I'm going to do it. Yeah.
Now,
so
I think
words mean nothing.
I think what's really interesting now about this point is that you and I can see people careening, plunging through one rock bottom into a further rock bottom, into a further one. And people who care for that person don't get it. They don't understand. And they're often suffering and running around trying to rescue them, that actually there is no end to this spiral of self-destruction. So you see other people running around throwing money at the problem, trying to get them help, paying for therapy, and not seeing that actually this person is hell-bent on self-destruction at a deep level. And isn't one of the principles of therapy to talk to the family or the person who's trying to bail them out all the time and try to get them not to bail out? But that's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, do you agree that that's the advice?
Yeah, I was remembering you and I chatted about this last time, and I thought about it a lot, in the sense that the family obviously enables a lot because of their fear of losing the child or, the family member. I mean, and then I thought to myself, how would I feel if I drove down the street and I saw my mom or somebody with a signboard at the traffic light begging for food or money? Meanwhile, I know that she would probably want drugs, but not my mom really, though. But what do you do? Do you give them money? Do you stop? Do you ask her, okay, I mean, it's your child, it's your loved one? Or do you just keep driving and hope that one day when they do knock on the door, they really want the help? But, Dr. Raj, I think addiction's always going to be something that we're never going to have the actual cure for, but we've sure got the heart to give it our best shot to get you a better life, or to get you one that you deserve, I don't know. For me, if I could help everyone, I would. If I could if I could drive around the streets, pick people up, load them up, and take them to get help, and I knew that would work. It wouldn't, though, because can I tell you who some of the most entitled people are? The people we've rescued off the streets. And that might be controversial, but they're not used to having a normal routine or normal life, so they expect you to give it to them. Like I would put my hand out the window and give you some money at the robot, so they're quite expectant when arriving at a rehab, and often don't last. You'll see them back on the street in a few weeks' time. Yeah.
Very interesting point you're making there. I think. But let's go back to the point you made about driving on. You're at the traffic light. Someone's got a sign around their neck. They've really hit rock bottom. And you're saying the correct thing to do, I think you're saying this, sometimes is to drive on. And you're talking about how difficult that is. But the view in the world of therapy is by driving on, you're creating more the conditions where that person may rescue themselves than if you keep stopping and bailing them out by handing them money. Is that right? Is that the view?
Exactly. If I had to give them anything, Dr. Raj, because I knew they were an addict, it definitely wouldn't be money. It would be a sandwich. It would be a cool drink. It would be a bottle of water. And my heart would break and I'd probably cry for hours after. But at the end of the day, Dr. Raj, you and I both know how many lives get ruined by one person who's an addict. It's not, you know, if you look at the roles that are played in a family because of the addict, it's hectic. So at one point you've got to decide, I've got maybe other people in my family. I'm going to drive past or come back I'll go to the shop, I'm going to buy a loaf of bread and I'll come and drop it off and say, I hope you're okay, and then keep going. But I'm certainly not going to enable with money because I know where that's going to go. I think it's always going to be a question that would be the most difficult for a loved one, but I think it would be the best option to do. Because how many rehabs, how many times, how much money, and at who else's expense are you prepared to keep doing that? Because it's your expense, and I'm sure there's other loved ones involved as well.
Yeah. But again, at the risk of saying something most controversial when we've got 3 minutes to go, some addicts enter into relationships, they seduce someone into a relationship, thinking about a romantic relationship, then exploit that person relentlessly, and maybe suck that person dry in terms of money or whatever. What that person never realized is that romance at the beginning was probably a manipulation and driven by the desire to extract something from them. Am I being
exactly? What romance? I see that often. And I often see it, you often see it sometimes addict with addict, because two vulnerable people wanting attention, wanting to know they're still loved, somehow form a relationship doomed, obviously, because they're both still fresh in recovery, and too many emotions involved. But yeah, I think the exploitation from an addict to someone else, a sugar daddy or whatever, however you're looking at it, or someone that could provide you with something is great, because you often find the person exploited might be an occasional user. A party cocaine user, say, and then they've met someone who's more frequent, but has party cocaine with you, but is actually using full time when you're not around, using your money. So there's just a whole, every day there's something new that pops up, a new situation. It never ends. It's so interesting. And sad.
But now we're talking about, as you said, how many other people's lives does one addict destroy? You put that very poignantly. Often you see someone falling in love with an addict. They were an addict before the relationship begins. You're trying to warn that person who's falling in love with the addict that this is probably not going to end well. And maybe even the relationship is there to service the addiction, because the person falling in love has got money and got a functional life, and the addict's going to prey on that. And the person falling in love can't see that there may be a manipulation, etc., going on. But again, part of the difficulty of our jobs is you have to stand by and watch that car crash happen, because the advice is very rarely taken. This is not.
It's never taken. It's love, Dr. Raj.
Yes, exactly. It's spooky hearing you speak, because often you say exactly what I've experienced. And I don't realize how aligned both our worlds are. Interesting, even though we work in different parts of the world. So I find that very difficult. I feel sorry for addicts, but I feel particularly sorry for people getting sucked into a relationship with an addict where they're going to get destroyed by it.
Exactly. And that's what I mean. The destruction is I think way more than you and I could even imagine sometimes. we get to hear it in bits and pieces. But I think along that route of destruction, where we hear mainly about the close people, there were probably 40 people also in line of the destruction somehow, some way, and trusting, because we want to trust. That's human nature, is to be trusting. And then you meet someone who's prepared to manipulate you and destroy you. You then also might turn to alcohol. I don't know. And I know advice is not taken. I'd love to say, please, what are you doing? Been there, done that, didn't work, got the T-shirt, but they're not going to listen. You've got to go and maybe make your own bed and then go and lie in it and come and tell me about it later.
Yes. So in the few seconds we got left, well, I'm going to say something very controversial, but I think it's kind of what you're saying. The heart of a lot of quite serious problems in this area is destruction of other people, and it's unique. People may get cancer and terrible diseases, and that hurts other people. But this kind of area we're discussing is unique in its ability to destroy a whole pathway of other people's lives. And I don't think that is really quite recognized. People feel sympathy for people with the problem, don't realize there's a trail of destruction of other people, don't receive any sympathy or any help from the system. Do you agree with that point?
Yes, and Dr. Raj, just quickly, although we do know, psychological, the DSM-5 or whatever can classify it as a gene or whatever that we have, but it seems chosen. Cancer's not chosen. I didn't choose to get cancer, say, but I have chosen to drink myself half to death and have 50 car accidents, and make you worry and not go to sleep at night. So it almost seems like you've chosen to hurt me. Why did you choose that over me? Whereas cancer, cancer unfortunately is terrible, but you didn't make that choice to go and get it.
Yes. But, I mean, you're saying something controversial. A lot of people would say that the addict is also got a kind of cancer, but we'll discuss that on another occasion.
I was going to say, there's so much to discuss, and we'll never have enough time.
Jane, thank you very much indeed for talking with us today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me again. I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.